Despite being a member of such bodies as the Human Rights Council and Council of Europe, several independent bodies, such as Human Rights Watch, have repeatedly criticized the Azerbaijani government for its human rights record. Among other concerns, authorities have been accused of arbitrary arrests, indefinite detentions, severe beatings, torture, and forced disappearances. Despite the existence of independent news outlets, journalists who criticize the government are often severely harassed, imprisoned, and even physically assaulted. In the 2013-14 Press Freedom Index published by Reporters Without Borders, Azerbaijan ranked 160th out of an overall total of 180 nations. President Ilham Aliyev inherited power from his late father Heydar Aliyev, who maintained an extensive cult of personality. Ilham Aliyev has often been criticized for failing to improve the situation of civil liberties from his father's policies. Public demonstrations against the ruling regime are not tolerated, and authorities often use violence to disperse protests. Since the Aliyev family first took charge in 1993, Azerbaijan has not had a single election deemed free and fair by international observers. Corruption is considered to be endemic in all areas of Azerbaijani politics. The ruling family has aroused suspicion from various independent media outlets for the vast wealth, as evidenced by the purchasing of extensive multi-million-dollar properties in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Electoral rights. Although Azerbaijan is nominally a representative democracy, recent elections there have widely been contested as fraudulent and seriously flawed. Azerbaijani media coverage of the election is considered to be overwhelmingly biased in favor of the administration. Also, former President Heydar Aliyev is known to have filled the central and local electoral commissions with government supporters prior to various key elections since 2003. Azerbaijani non-governmental bodies were also banned from monitoring the vote. Irregular incidents such as voting chiefs running off with the ballots, ballot stuffing, multiple voting, and vote tampering were recorded by international monitors. During the 2013 election, an official smartphone app run by the Central Election Commission inadvertently released final election results a day before voting locations had opened. The results showed Ilham Aliyev having won with 72.76% of the recorded votes, while the nearest opposing candidate, Jamil Hassanli, tallied just 7.4%. The data was recalled, with an official claim is that the app's developer had mistakenly tested the app with 2008 election results, but the data released did not match the voter totals, nor the winning percentages of the 2008 election. On the 10th of October, Hassanli called for the results to be annulled due to vote rigging, claiming the elections were not free and fair because of electoral fraud and government control of all television channels. Azerbaijan has been harshly criticized for bribing members and officials from international organizations to legitimize the fraudulent elections, a practice which has been termed as caviar diplomacy. Recently this has been the case with MEPs of the European Parliament, whose positive assessment of Azerbaijani elections sparked a major scandal in Europe. European Stability Initiative think tank has published a series of detailed reports exposing the vested interest of the observation missions participating in Azerbaijani elections. Freedom of assembly and expression of political beliefs. Up until June 2005, the Azerbaijani people did not enjoy freedom of assembly. The blanket ban on opposition gatherings was lifted after national pressure, but events leading up to parliamentary elections later that year proved this to be merely a nominal change for a very short time. the authorities denied opposition supporters the right to demonstrate or hold rallies in or near any city centers. Those attending opposition rallies that had not been sanctioned by the government were beaten and arrested en masse. Police were known to detain opposition activists in an attempt to convince them into giving up the political work. Youth movement members and opposition members were detained for conspiring to overthrow the government, a charge that has not been substantiated. After the elections, not a single opposition rally was allowed. According to the Human Rights Watch 2013 report, Azerbaijan's record on freedom of expression, assembly, and association has been on a steady decline for some years, but it has seen a dramatic deterioration since mid-2012. In April 2014, RPT, European Human Rights Organization, reported that human rights, particularly freedom of expression, assembly, and association, are deteriorating in Azerbaijan. State-authorized violence in Azerbaijan, torture, police abuse, and excessive use of force are rife. Defendants are often subjected to severe beating to try to coerce a confession, although electric shock, threats of rape, and threats against members of the defendant's family are also used as torture. Torture is less prevalent in post-detention prison facilities, although former inmates have alleged that security forces beat hundreds of prisoners by forcing them to run through a gauntlet, whereby they were beaten with batons. The government have taken no action against torture, or against officials who partake in torture. Indeed, Vilayat Ivazov, the head of the organized crime unit, was named Deputy Interior Minister in 2005. Political prisoners. International pressure has been exerted on Azerbaijan to release its number of political prisoners. Since joining the Council of Europe, the Azerbaijani government have released 100 political prisoners, but many remain in custody, and opposition supporters continue to be detained without proof of wrongdoing. A number of Talish national minority activists, including Novrazali Mammadov, Atakan Abalov, Alakram Hamatov, are recognized as political prisoners or refugees by the international organizations. In March 2011, opposition activists Bakhtiyar Hajiyev and Jabbar Savalan were arrested after they helped to organize Arab Spring-style protests through Facebook. Both were given prison terms on unrelated charges. Their arrests were protested by the European Parliament, Human Rights Watch, and Index on Censorship. Amnesty International named both men prisoners of conscience and called for their immediate release. Jabbar Savalan was released from prison after 11 months on the 26th of December 2011. In April 2012, human rights and environmental activist Oktay Gulaliyev was arrested and allegedly tortured. He was released in June. Later on in 2013, 7 young activists, including 4 board members of NIDA civic movement, were kidnapped and arrested after the protests held against the non-combat military deaths in March and April in Baku. They are charged with preparing the riots during the protests in Baku. Initially, the young people were charged with illegal possession of weapons and drugs. As reported by international human rights organization Amnesty International, some of the 8 activists of NIDA, who were arrested on false charges, were tortured. Amnesty International recognized all the arrested young men as prisoners of conscience. Freedom of the media. Azerbaijan is ranked not free by Freedom House in its annual Freedom of the Press survey with a score of 79 out of 100. The 3 broadcasting stations BBC, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty and Voice of America, which were the only ones that ensured political pluralism for its citizens, are banned in Azerbaijan since 2009. The authorities use a range of measures to restrict freedom of the media within the country. Opposition and independent media outlets and journalists have their access to print houses and distribution networks limited, or can find themselves facing defamation charges and crippling fines and are subject to intimidation tactics, including imprisonment on fabricated charges. Most Azerbaijanis receive their information from mainstream television, which is unswervingly pro-government and under strict government control. According to a 2012 report of the NGO Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety, Azerbaijani citizens are unable to access objective and reliable news on human rights issues relevant to Azerbaijan, and the population is underinformed about matters of public interest. Azerbaijani authorities have imprisoned several notable journalists. The Committee to Protect Journalists has stated the charges against many journalists are fabricated and politicized. At the end of 2014, 8 journalists remained behind bars. International instances such as the Human Rights Commissioner of the Council of Europe have consistently refuted the justifications by the Azerbaijani authorities that jail journalists had been prosecuted and sentenced for common crimes. Prison conditions for journalists are reported as dire, with routine ill-treatment and denial of medical care. More than 10 journalists remain in jail in Azerbaijan by the end of 2015. They include Kadia Ismailova, a reporter for Radio Azadlik, on charges of inciting a person to commit suicide, illegal business dealings and abuse of power; Rasul Jafarov, a free expression and free media advocate and human rights defender, on charges of embezzlement, illegal entrepreneurship, tax evasion, abuse of power; Seymour Hazy, a columnist for the newspaper Azadlik, on a charge of hooliganism; Omar Mamdov and Abdul Abalov, bloggers, on charges of illegal storage and sale of drugs; Parviz Hashimli, a journalist, on charges of smuggling and illegal storage and sale of firearms; Nijat Aliyev, editor-in-chief of the Azardeba, Arizona news website, on various charges, including drug possession and inciting hatred; Rashad Ramazanov, an independent blogger, on charges of illegal storage and sale of drugs. Illegal evictions. According to Human Rights Watch, beginning in 2008, as part of the urban renewal campaign in Baku, thousands of homeowners were evicted from their houses in many parts of the city to make way for parks, business centers and elite residential areas. The process was engineered by the mayoralty of Baku and was often carried out without proper warning. The compensations offered were well below the market value. The residents also felt they had few options to win a case in court if they filed a lawsuit. In some cases, demolitions continued regardless of court orders' prohibition to do so. Forced evictions worsened in 2011, after Azerbaijan won the 2011 Eurovision Song Contest, and with it the right to host the 2012 one. These evictions angered many people, and were well exposed in the press, after hundreds were turfed out for Crystal Hall to be built. According to the head of the Institute of Peace and Democracy, Leyla Yunus, 60,000 people were deprived of the property contrary to the Constitution of Azerbaijan between 2009 and 2012. She expressed doubts in this problem ever being solved, as mafia stands behind this whole activity. Quote, in her opinion, the number of instances of illegal property deprivation is so high that civilians cannot keep up with the record, and the process is likely to follow the model of the 1920s Soviet nationalization policy. 2011 European Parliament resolution On 12 May 2011, the European Parliament passed a resolution condemning Azerbaijani human rights violations and oppression of opposition forces. The resolution mentioned concern for Aynullah Fataliyev, Jabbar Savalan, and other prisoners by name, as well as general concern for the increasing number of incidents of harassment, attacks and violence against civil society and social network activists and journalists in Azerbaijan. Situation in Nakhchivan. Human rights are considered exceptionally poor in the Azerbaijani exclave of Nakhchivan, dubbed Azerbaijan's North Korea by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in 2007. An autonomous republic under the governorship of Vasif Talib. Concerns have been raised regarding police brutality, impunity, extensive limitations on civil liberties, and corruption. Nakhchivan has been described as a laboratory of repression in which repressive methods are tested and then applied on a large scale in the rest of Azerbaijan.